So, I have a show for you today on Owning Her Health on our 60th episode. Dr. Steffany Moonaz has been working diligently in the field of yoga therapy. She is a researcher who is doing the work of research and yoga therapy focused on whole person transformation for people living with arthritis and chronic pain. She completed her Ph.D. in public health at Johns Hopkins University and now serves as professor and chair of integrative health research at the Maryland University of Integrative Health. And we speak in here how that was really a path that a lot of women have to make for the same types of reasons. And do you stay with a place prestigious like Johns Hopkins? And what made her go on over Maryland University, right? So Dr. Moonaz mentors and coaches young professionals, emerging researchers, and people living with chronic pain. Her book, Yoga Therapy for Arthritis, A Whole Person Approach to Movement and Lifestyle, was released by Singing Dragon Press in 2019. We have a real conversation with the woman behind all of these wonderful things coming up next.
Welcome to this episode of Owning Her Health with your host, Dr. Lisa Holland. Join Lisa as she starts the conversation on what it really takes to become a healthy, wealthy, and whole CEO of your life. Listen in to real talk by real lady leaders in all walks of life as they open up on personal health stories, wealth, career, and feminine abundant living. Learn how to grow by owning your body, expanding your mind, and aligning your soul with the purpose only you can pursue in this world. Happiness begins with owning her health right now.
Beautiful, beautiful. So we are here for an Owning Her Health episode. And I came across Steffany in the International Association of Yoga Therapists, and she was doing work with arthritis and presenting things at the time that I was in a room. I think that's one of the first times that I came across you. Name was there because you're into research and you're presenting things at these things. But it was a CIC conference circle, or which for those of you who don't know, because you're not in the IOIT, it's like these like little community conferences that we have beforehand. And we didn't meet up at the time, but now with COVID and everything, I was looking for people who could come on to the Owning Her Health show and bring with them some of the stuff from yoga therapy, because I think we're finally ready to really embrace what we're going to have to do here. We're going to have a whole bunch of long haulers. I don't know when you're hearing this show, but I'm recording this show we're in the second half now of 2021. We're finishing off the summer, going into the fall. We have a resurgence of cases. We have a lot of different attitudes, and we keep, I think we're finally going off of the conversation of just people dying and really switching to the fact that we're going to have these long hauler people, which us in the yoga therapy world of dealing with trauma and holistic health and chronic inflammations and thinking of the things being from the inside out. I'm just looking at this like, hallelujah, like there's an open bridge of conversation. So I think Steffany's work with her research, and we'll be hearing about some things that she's put out there so that it's easier for other people to understand when you're reading some of this research, especially you professionals that listen to me and want to bring this in and are thinking this is not, I hate to say it, evidence-based and all this amongst everything with the virus, but making these smart decisions right now, either for you to professionally go on and maybe bring some of these tools in, especially for your own recovery, because we have a whole bunch of health and wellness providers and therapy, just a whole bunch of people that are trying to service people who are going through this, mothers and fathers and everybody, I think right now, but especially if you are a health provider, maybe having some other tools, because we're going to be going through the next, I feel like, 3 to 5 years, maybe even, into the whole next decade of really exploding healthcare into hopefully what we've been trying to do. And I don't know if Steffany, you agree, of just shifting the mindset from a sick care model to a well-being model that doesn't necessarily need you to be healthy to be working on well-being. So you don't have to be cured from your cancer or post-recovery to then go into, wellness care. You don't have to necessarily even have a diagnosis to be focusing on some of these healthy behaviors. So thank you so much, Steffany. As you heard in the introduction, all her wonderful accolades, but I want to pass it over to you. Who are you? Who are you in the conversation right now with your work, and what do you hope to bring to the conversation of health and well-being?
Thank you so much, Lizette, for framing that in a way that points to the timeliness of the work that we do and the opportunity that we have. So I am a yoga therapist and a yoga researcher and a yoga therapy teacher, trainer, et cetera, right? In all of those roles, my focus is on whole person care for people who are living with chronic pain and systemic autoimmune conditions. And it was very important to me as a researcher not to have my work stay in an ivory tower and get read by a bunch of other researchers, but as a doctor of public health, it was essential to me that whatever work I was doing was actually going to get out into the world and change lives. It's why I do it.
Right.
And so I founded Yoga for Arthritis as an organization in order to take that evidence and actually translate it into practices and knowledge acquisition that would shift the experience of people who are living with these conditions every day, so that that begins to change, as you're saying, how we even think about health and wellness and separating that from disease care.
Right, right. And so, with your background right now, how are you seeing, like, what are you seeing just even on the horizon? So now you're this researcher looking at it from, like, the what ifs and the possibilities, looking at things now in the need. Where do you see the biggest impact some of your work could go? Because, like, let's just talk about it in that holistic model of pain care.
Right.
And what is pain, right? It's not just the body. It could be
Right.
in the mind. And I think people too, and I want to mention this for some of you listening to us, I think for the majority, you understand mind is not brain. That mind is all around us and maybe even exchanged in a certain consciousness with other people. So I feel like we're sort of in this big bubble now of pain, really.
Yeah.
On multiple levels.
If you take a condition, okay, so let's say someone is living with osteoarthritis of the knees, okay, super common, affects lots of people, especially as they get older. That is not a disease of the knee, because while there may be changes that are happening in the structure of the knee joint, when we're looking at health and wellness, what's going on in the knee is also affecting what's going on in the whole person. And I mean that in a variety of ways. So we see changes in functioning of the nervous system, changes in brain structure and function, changes in, inflammatory processes, and that's just on a body level. So we also see, of course, changes in mood, in coping, in self-concept, in relationship, in roles, in meaning and purpose. And so if we're looking at this in a limited capacity, as the biomedical model has historically done, what can I do for your knee? Then I think we're missing the boat. And even I see this a lot in yoga, and people come to me often wanting a solution for their knee. So they want yoga poses or a yoga sequence that's going to fix their knee. And I have to constantly redirect to a whole person perspective to say, this isn't only about what's happening in the knee. And I think that there absolutely has been a shift in the way that modern medicine conceptualizes pain and pain conditions and systemic conditions, because it's about more than pain, as being multifaceted. So we see more inclusive models that are looking to at least a biopsychosocial approach, in some cases, a biopsychosocial spiritual approach, and a shift away from only measuring things like functional status, and also looking at what we call patient-reported outcomes, which is what matters to the person themselves, not just their doctor, and having them tell us what their priorities are and how they feel, right? That's patient-centered care. So I come in and I have knee osteoarthritis, and I tell you, actually, what's really bothering me is I don't have the energy that I used to have. And so let's talk about that. And, not to ignore what's happening in the knee, but to look at what is happening with the whole person to improve their quality of life, as well as their disease management.
Right. And that's a good point you make in terms of we need to really be thinking about quality of life, because I can say as a doctor of physical therapy, they'd come in very similar, and it would be a lot of times like my doctor said. It wouldn't even be their ownership of their own knee and what they were saying. And the point being, like, I'd be even trying to be like, your knee's connected to your ankle and your hip. So we might have a hip problem. They'd be like, why are we doing hip exercises? Or I'd have a person that, I'd look at their history and like a second, I get them undressed or whatever. And I'd be like, so what's this big scar here? Because it's not on the history, and they're like, oh, that was my heart. My heart, it has nothing to do with this. I'm like, actually, we're going to be moving, like the disconnect. Right? Like we've made it so segmented. How is this going to help me? And now they've got Dr. Google. So they know how it's going to help them when they walk in and they're talking with you. But getting to this whole centered care, I feel like so much is, and why I love yoga as a vehicle is because it puts the ownness on the person and their journey right off the bat. As I'm hearing you and listening to him, like, how the heck did you, because it's not like every PhD, right? It's not like everybody who's in like public health or whatever even gets to being a chair in the Maryland University of Integrative Health. Like, how did you get down that path? Like, were you always sort of into more integrative things? Were you enlightened by a certain personal story?
I am not much younger than you. FYI.
It's the yoga. We look so
yeah, right.
That's what I tell people. What do you think I've been talking about?
Okay, so I was a dance student my whole life. My mother was actually a dance teacher. And so I started lessons when I was 3. And I really took to it. And so I was at the dance studio every day after school for hours. And there was one particular experience that I think set me on this course, which was, I know I was in middle school, so somewhere in middle school, and I entered the studio in a foul mood. I believe that it may have had something to do with what happened socially at school that day, but honestly, I can't tell you what it was. It was some first world problem, teenage drama. Yeah. And I walked into class. So I had a few classes that evening, and the first class of the evening, I know that I went into that class with a chip on my shoulder. And I remember, so those of you who have had dance lessons know that after you warm up, there's a part in the class where you go across the floor. And so you're sort of like standing on the side and you're waiting for your turn to do a sequence across the floor. And I remember being at the window by the bar, waiting for my turn to go across the floor. And I realized that I wasn't upset anymore, that whatever had been bothering me had completely disappeared from my thinking and from my emotional state. It was just gone, to the point that I don't even know what it is, right? And in that moment, I found my dharma, which was, I had this thought that there are people in the world who are suffering a lot more than I am, and they don't have this. they don't have this like magical tool, which I would now call mindful movement, being fully immersed in the experience of your moving body, which dance is and yoga is as well, to bring those self-care strategies to people who were suffering. That was my dharma. And so a whole lot happened from that point. And I could fill in the blanks if you'd like, but looking back on it, that's exactly what I do every day. And if you kind of follow the steps that I took, I did not set out to be a researcher that studies the effects of yoga on people living with arthritis and chronic pain. I set out to reduce suffering by bringing these tools to people. And public health was a vehicle for that, because I realized that, I wanted to be a neuroscientist, and then I wanted to be a medical doctor, and then I wanted to be a naturopath, and then I wanted to be an osteopath. And there were reasons why each of those turned out to be not the right way. I'd like start going down that road and then realize I'm not going to be able to fulfill my dharma on that path. And I back up, and public health was. And I did my Ph.D. in public health at Johns Hopkins, which is not a bastion of integrative health research.
Right.
And especially at the time, which was about 20 years ago, I had a few champions, but I was definitely out on a limb. But the timing was perfect for what I was doing. There was more. What I think the powers that be realized was that people are using these things. People want tools, and we don't understand if they're safe, how they work, how to optimize them. And so that's a blind spot in our research portfolio, that there's stuff out into the world that hasn't been well studied. And so I kind of showed up on the scene at a time when it was pretty easy to get funding for the work I was doing, even though it was sort of out there at the time. And actually, my mentor was told not to work with me because it would ruin her career. And both of us are doing just fine.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, Lizette, about the trajectory that you tend to be on as a PhD in public health, I had the opportunity to stay at Johns Hopkins and do the postdoc there, and move along that path. And honestly, what redirected me at that point was that I wrote my dissertation with a baby on my lap, and I started doing some investigation of what the lives were of female academics at Johns Hopkins, mothers who were on this path. And I did not see a way to have the work-life balance that I was seeking, to be the kind of mother that I wanted to be, and also have a fulfilling career. And that was what shifted my direction from being at an R1 institution to where I am now, where I actually get to train people who are going out into the world and doing this work, and bringing, teaching people who wouldn't otherwise be evidence informed how to become so.
I love that for so many reasons. My kids, like, I was a weird mom. I was like, my kids, I'm not going to put them on a track. It's at middle school, 6th grade, for the rest of their, like, you had to go on this track. And there was no, like, if you went on the wrong track, you're like, right, screwed. I was like, this is ridiculous. Yeah. And I can see where we're probably working with people coming up that didn't do that exploration. Yeah. And you get lost. True. So I love that part of it. And I think that's so important, especially for women. Yeah. You got to stay with those curves. You've got to stay with that curvy hustle I talk about. That's what I'm talking about, that ability to flow. And I think, we're in a very masculinated world. And as we got more tech based and as we got more systematic and industrialized, it went more that way, very logic, right? But I also love the fact you kind of had that mommy moment, like you had that. And I think that's also a strength also women bring into owning our health. And I feel like our health is the wealth of the world, is the next generation, is our partners, is, is our future. And you made that choice. And what is my definition of success? Which I think is a really big question to ask. So you were saying I was at an R1, that's the way you're supposed to go, right? Be this prestigious. That's the way you're supposed to look successful. Like, who cares? Like, if I exude this level of like feeling good, I can influence my sisters to choose different choices as well. So if you were to look at yourself, like, let's say just like 10 years ago, is this, if you could ask yourself or speak now from your, your goddess wisdom at this point to the woman 10 years ago, did she know that? Did she know the choices she was making, or did she think she was going wayward, or was she wise already?
So that the mentor that I mentioned earlier, I actually sought her guide. And I think having mentors at all is such a key to not only success career-wise, but getting guidance about all aspects of life from somebody who's been there. And so I am grateful that I have had women mentors who have been gracious and willing to put their time and energy into providing guidance for me. And at this juncture, when I was making this decision about leaving Hopkins, I asked her, is this a huge mistake? Am I ruining my career? And, is my research going to go nowhere? I still want to be a researcher. And she said, you're getting off the Acela and you're getting onto like the local train. But if you want to get back on the Acela at any point, you can. You won't be where you would have been if you stayed on that train, but you could still get back on it. Like it has not taken off and left you behind.
Right.
You're always welcome back to it.
Right.
And so if you're okay with that, if you're okay with being on, and honestly, I am probably not going to get back on the Acela because I'm still doing work on that local train that matters. And it's not, I'm not the primary on multi-million-dollar research grants, but I'm a secondary, right? I get to do really fulfilling work on the train that I'm on.
Right. And I think that's so important, right? Like, how am I going to feel filled? But I want to be like a present mom, because that was like important to me from my, own childhood wounds or whatever, in terms of what I thought, if I was going to get married as this independent woman, I wanted family, like that's why I'm getting married. But I can see, like, I didn't have a lot of those women mentors, or, I always felt like that. Like, I felt like I just didn't have, and I definitely didn't have ones that were in a balance like I wanted. So sometimes we have to go off and create this tangent. And like you said, if we're supposed to, I am a firm believer that if something is yours, you're not going to miss it. It's just that you're just going to always, you're going to maybe create a choice that you decide to give it to somebody else, or you're going to come back at a different place, and it might be tweaked in how you are part of the, you might be the level 5 of that versus the level 1 of that. But overall, your impact will not be missed.
Yeah. I don't want to sugarcoat the very difficult decisions that working mothers have to make that working fathers don't. And my decision to leave Johns Hopkins in order to be a more present mother is the kind of decision that women have to make all of the time about what is possible in a career when they don't want to sacrifice being present for their children. And honestly, there is no such thing. You are constantly sacrificing one to the other. So even to have the career that I have, I am giving up things for and with my children that I would be able to be and do if I didn't have a career. And similarly, I make sacrifices in my career in order to be present for my children. And while we have made a lot of progress, I think that we do not have gender equity in the way that parenting is regarded and the way that working parents have to calculate the decisions that they make. And especially during COVID, when the burden of sacrifice has been very weighted to women in terms of the homeschooling and the management of the household. And many women have had to pull back on their careers or pause their careers in ways that men haven't had to do to the same degree. So I think that it's possible to falsely suggest that we can have it all, and that my example of like, oh, I have found fulfillment on the local train and I'm doing great work and I'm bringing evidence-informed practice. Yes, I am so grateful for the work I'm doing. And had I to choose it again, even without the children as a motivator, I would choose the work I'm doing now because it's the work that I want to do in the world. But I think that decision happened in the context of being a woman who wants to be a parent and have a career, which is a challenging balance.
Definitely, which is why I think, some of my push has been towards, I completely agree. You're in these situations where, and to the extent that we don't necessarily want to have it be not us, it's like there is like this, again, this sacred sort of role that we do play, and that's a whole nother show. And I've talked little by little in some of my other shows. Like, I just think feminism kind of went off the wrong track at some point. Like, we kind of like got a little disturbed. And I'm always saying that I also think we didn't really give the men really anything to do to be working on how do I make it more in the home at the same time we're going into the world. And so we just sort of like facilitated, I call it the lipstick patriarchy. We have this whole bunch of women that are like basically, against that as well, because they get their one position and, but that's a whole nother show on its own. But thank you so much for bringing that up, because it's a hard turn to make. And yet our value in making that is so underrepresented and underappreciated, because are there enough women yet who utilize their power, right? Because we get to our power years and our legacy making years, and we might be exhausted by then. I mean, I'm working in women's health, for years, and I was getting all those professional women or whatever that, like, they're so messed up physiologically, like they don't have the health and the whereabouts. I mean, that's why I went and brought in the yoga for women, because I was like, look, they're not going to listen to me for this or that. They just want to like lose weight or whatever. Like, how can I get into that inner core? Because I knew, if mommy ain't happy, the family dynamics, then the social dynamics, then everything. Yeah. And us doing our work, and part of the reason why I have this Owning Her Health podcast is like, I want to show all these women doing all of these different things so that you can see the woman behind the title and behind and the choices she made, and go off on these kind of, wonderful things like you said, because I don't think even other women looking at women such as us understand that the gap's not that big between them and us, and that we really need to kind of, be getting off that train of like, I'm just going to learn how to play the guy's game really well, but with a baby on my hip and whatever, because that, having it all would kind of look like that. I'm going to just create a whole new industry if I have to. Like, we're going to make this work. And I think that comes from our creatrix, and I don't think it's appreciated. And nor is it fostered in men, nor is that feminine sort of code, I feel, fostered in men. So I appreciate that. What are you doing now that you think is going to help, leave that legacy? Or what do you hope, in the work that you're doing now, that you could maybe say in 10 years, look back and be like, hey girl, like, I remember when we started that, and this is where I wanted it to be?
I mean, the visionary in me sees healthcare transformed, and that obviously is not my work to do alone, but I hope to contribute toward it, that we see self-care as part of healthcare, and that it's not something that people have to seek out separately on their own because it's not valued, discussed, or acknowledged by the conventional healthcare system. And so I do see that starting to happen, is more of a marriage between the kind of work that we do and conventional healthcare that is increasingly valuing whole person, patient-centered care. In my own work, I feel like everyone that I train to bring yoga safely and appropriately and effectively to these populations is transforming lives. And every client that I work with is shifting in even their relationship to the disease, their self-concept around what new normal means for them. And academically, there's a growing body of research literature on the effects of yoga for chronic pain, but there are many populations who have been left out of that growing body of research. So it has been important to me to look at specifically, how do we bring yoga that is culturally appropriate, feasible, and acceptable to populations of color that are disproportionately affected by more severe symptoms in chronic pain conditions, children who are living with chronic pain who aren't even on the radar in many cases, and you catch them early and teach them these skills when they're young, and it changes the way that they live for decades to come. So there's more work that I want to do on the research front as well.
And I think, definitely, obviously, with what we're going to end up seeing with the long haulers and everything in terms of opening that door, because that's looking basically like fibromyalgia coupled with Epstein-Barr, coupled with, because it really does, it really did attack where you're weak, and we were really weak in a lot of areas. So I think, the work you're bringing in, and I love that, I want you to mention a little bit of it just really quickly about your research that you just put out there in terms of, like, when we're looking at this, which I think we have to do, you have to also ask your yoga therapist or your yoga teacher, like, if they're going to do something with you, like, what's your education? Do you know about this? Like, we have to go in as educated consumers of our healthcare too, especially through this transitional time, because, like you said, like, it's going to blow up and we are going to go through a big transformation, but there's going to be a lot of people selling a lot of snake oil. So tell us a little bit about, because you qualified yoga, because yoga's all over the board, right? Like right now we're having a union of some sort, but like, you wanted to qualify it for people. Tell us a little bit of what you wanted to do with that research, and
so
where we can find it.
There's something called research reporting guidelines, and those tell researchers and peer reviewers and journal editors, when you're writing a research manuscript, it has to include A, B, C, D, E. You have to tell us what the medication was, how it was formulated, when it was taken, what was the dose, right? All of that is obviously, we need to understand what was done in the research for a variety of reasons, in order to inform clinical practice, in order to inform policy recommendations, in order to inform consumer choice, in order to inform future research. And that exists in a lot of areas. Acupuncture, for example, has a guideline that says if you're publishing an acupuncture paper, you have to say what points, what gauge of needle, how long it was in, how many sessions, right? Nothing like that existed for yoga. So you'd end up with these yoga research papers that would say something like, they did yoga for 90 minutes twice a week. And
right.
like,
and you have no idea, were they like, doing an Iyengar?
What is that? Right, exactly. No idea. Did they do breathing practices? Was there meditation? No idea, right? We were lucky to get how often they met in some cases. And so what we've recently published, which took multiple rounds of surveys with yoga experts from around the world to build consensus and decide on the starting place. It's imperfect, but it's a place to start.
It's going to evolve.
that when you write a yoga research paper, it has to have this in it. And what that means for yoga therapists and yoga teachers out in the world is, we're asking you to become evidence-informed practitioners, but you can't do that if you don't know what they did in the research. So if people start using this guideline, then when you read a paper, so for example, a study that we hope to be doing in the coming years is looking at yoga for chronic pain in methadone clinics. So when we publish that work, if we follow this guideline and we tell you exactly what we did and what the effects of it were, then you could take that and bring it into another methadone clinic somewhere and hopefully get the same kinds of results. But if we don't tell you what we did, how do you know how to bring it into practice? So that's my hope.
Yeah, and that's another important part of understanding, science is evolving, and we get into this thing that it's like, I do think it started getting presented in academia like this is the truth. Like this is what the research says. So this is the only truth. And when things get changed, people are like, wait a minute, you said yesterday, whatever. It's like, because we know different things now. And I think it's important for people listening that might not be in the world of research and just academia to understand that, like, we want that to be, we want to be able to like apply new information. And all I can say is like, do you want the world living the way that your grandparents thought right now? Because they tried their best to understand the world, but there was just so much comprehension and consciousness level that they could get to. So we're going to need this, and it is going to evolve. And it's not a matter of this is bad research and this is good research. It's just that it's going to be constantly evolving, and we are constantly evolving. So where, Steffany, I know we're going to have other conversations, because I was like, oh my God, I could talk forever on that. Oh my God, I could talk forever on that. Where can somebody learn more about you? Or, obviously they can look on, we're now getting out of just the yoga journal book, and you might find the research with your name on it in, real places like PubMed and things like that. But where can we know more about you, and what are you going to be doing? And, is there a website, or is there a contact that you want to share?
Yeah. So if people are interested in my research, honestly, the best place to find that is a platform called ResearchGate, which is like LinkedIn for researchers. So all of my work is there, and you can ask for copies of things and contact me. But the best place to go for the work that I'm doing out in the world is my website, which is arthritis.yoga. And there you can work with me as a client. And that is, people who are living with arthritis and chronic pain conditions, but also yoga professionals who want some coaching around how they bring this work out into the world. Trainings for yoga therapists and yoga teachers, recordings, my books. And you can email me also through that site. So arthritis.yoga is the best starting place for that.
And I will have that on the main show notes. So make sure that you click on to go to the Owning Her Health main show notes, and you can click really easy over to those things. As we close things up, is there anything you want to leave us with in terms of just your own wisdom, having lived the life you lived, and seeing what the world through your eyes right now, that you could maybe just leave with our listeners now in terms of owning their health and well-being?
So I think that what has been most important in the trajectory of my own life, in terms of the management of my own health, which we haven't even gotten into, and my research and career and my family life, is to look for the open door. That if you hear my life story, it appears that things fell into my lap, but I had to be looking up and ready to catch them. And so if you're not paying attention to what shows up, then you're going to pass right by it and miss the opportunity to be transformed and to facilitate transformation for others.
I love that, because that's so true. That's such a real nugget So anybody who wasn't listening right now, reverse a little bit, 30 seconds or so, and listen to that, because making sure you're watching for the open door, because like she said, and I think that happens sometimes when, especially I find as when you're walking your yoga, when you're walking the talk, and it's working and you are manifesting this life or whatever in unison to your morals and you're, living that calm, or even in the business world where I'm talking about like having this biz bliss that people are like, they think it's like, oh, but that's because you've got this, or that's because, no, like you, unless you can be present, this is why you meditate. This is why you take a break. This is why you go out in nature. And it doesn't have to be a hard formal sit down and do some chanting thing or something like that, but like being present, because when somebody is offering it to you and you don't see it, which is basically what happens all the time, then it's like it was never there. So thank you so much, Steffany, for those words of wisdom. Those are awesome, awesome, awesome nuggets. And like I said, look on the show notes. And if you are interested in working with Steffany, go to her website and make sure that you are owning your health right now. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening into this episode of Owning Her Health with Dr. Lisa Holland. To learn more about her personal and professional development service, visit her online at drlisahollandpt.com.